In this section, I'll be discussing security of tenure and what this means, and also how a tenant can qualify for security of tenure. So security of tenure means two things. The first is that the tenant has a right to apply to court on expiry of the contractual term of its lease. And the second is the tenant has a right to remain in occupation on expiry of the contractual term of its lease. So in essence, what this means is that the tenant can remain in occupation despite the tenant's lease expiring. And the lease will only come to an end if it's brought to an end under one of the ways prescribed by the Act. So how does the tenant qualify for security of tenure? Well, there are two criteria which need to be met by the tenant. And the first is that the tenant occupies property for a business reason. So the tenant occupies property for residential purposes. This isn't for a business reason, and the tenant would not qualify. The second is that the tenant is an actual occupation of the property. So if the tenant is not an occupation, but a third party is, the tenant does not qualify and has no rights under security of tenure provisions under the Act. It is possible for the landlord and tenant to contract out of the Act. This, however, must be done before the lease is entered into. A lease is contracted out of the Act. There will be a relatively chunky provision in the lease which will specify that the lease has been contracted out of the Act and that the tenant has no security of tenure. And for this also to apply, the landlord should have served a notice on the tenant at least 2 weeks before entering into the lease, and this notice will say the tenant has no rights under the Act and the lease has been contracted out of the Act. If the landlord failed to do so within 2 weeks, it's not too late. The tenant could have sworn a statute declaration, and the statute declaration would say the tenant acknowledges that the lease has been contracted out of the Act.